You see, there's something profoundly strange about the human animal who wakes up, not just wakes up in the morning, but wakes up from the dream of the world itself. Because the spiritually awake are not simply people who know more or who have collected spiritual postcards from exotic traditions. They are beings who have remembered that they were dreaming and then, quietly, without announcement, have slipped out the side door of consensus reality. And so when you go looking for them, you don't find them where the noise is. You don't find them under the fluorescent lights of human ambition. You find them in the quiet, in the forests, in small rooms filled with books and dust, or behind a pair of eyes that seem to be watching eternity leak through the cracks of time. Now, why is it that such people, those we might call spiritually awake, don't like visitors? Why do they withdraw from the social circus, from the endless traffic of personality and performance? It's not because they despise others. Far from it. It's because they have come to see that most of what we call relationship is actually an exchange of illusions. They have stopped pretending to be who they never were. And when you stop pretending, you quickly discover how few people wish to meet what's real. The spiritually awake live in a delicate ecology of silence. Their inner world is not a fortress, it's a garden, and gardens must be tended, not trampled. Visitors, not in the physical sense, but in the psychological sense, come with their noise, their stories, their anxieties, their need to be seen. They come bearing the heavy baggage of the collective hallucination. And so the awakened one, sensing the vibrations of these psychic visitors, steps quietly back into the folds of stillness. For the same reason, a deer retreats from the sound of an approaching machine. You see, to awaken is not to become superhuman. It is to become profoundly sensitive. It is to feel the tremors of consciousness as they ripple through the field of being. And that sensitivity makes one both compassionate and weary. Compassionate because you see that everyone is sleepwalking through a dream of fear and desire. Weary because you know that to shout, "Wake up," into the dream rarely stirs anyone. It only disturbs their sleep. The spiritually awake person doesn't dislike visitors because they're cold. They simply live in a world where silence speaks louder than speech, where presence is more nourishing than conversation. And when you live there, you begin to see that most people come not to listen, but to fill the silence. Imagine sitting beside a lake so still that the reflection of the moon appears perfect upon it. Then imagine a crowd arriving, throwing pebbles and stones, laughing, shouting. The reflection shatters. That's how it feels to the awakened mind when the unawakened press too close. The serenity of direct perception, that naked contact with what is, becomes disturbed by the ripples of personality. But there's something deeper still. When you awaken, you discover that you were the visitor all along, a transient ripple on the vast ocean of consciousness. You were the one knocking on others' doors, seeking validation, attention, reassurance. And in awakening, that knocking ceases. You realize the house you were trying to enter was never locked. So when others come knocking, when they bring their energies, their projections, their noise, there is a kind of déjà vu. You see yourself in them, still trapped in the endless motion of seeking. And because you love them, you do not wish to feed that seeking. Sometimes silence is the greatest act of compassion. We live in a culture that celebrates exposure. Everything must be shared, displayed, discussed. But the spiritually awake inhabit the opposite dimension, the invisible, the interior, the unspeakable. They know that the deepest truths wither when exposed to the cold air of chatter. So they withdraw, not out of fear, but out of love for what is fragile and sacred within them. Sometimes people mistake this withdrawal for arrogance. They say, he thinks he's above us, or she's lost in her own world. But in truth, it's the opposite. The awake are below the world, deep in its roots. They are like the mycelium beneath the forest floor, unseen, silent, but connecting everything. Visitors walk above, unaware of the living network beneath their feet. To be awake is to know that words are poor vessels for truth, and so conversation becomes a kind of sacrilege, not because it's evil, but because it cannot hold what is infinite. You can't pour the ocean into a cup, and yet most visitors arrive with cups in hand, asking to be filled. So the awakened withdraw. They do not reject the world, they simply refuse to perform the dance of illusion. And that refusal, that radical stillness, can make others uncomfortable. Because silence, when encountered by the unready, sounds like judgment. But the silence of the awake is not judgment. It's an invitation. It says, can you bear to be with yourself without distraction, without performance, without story? Most cannot. They come, they sit, and within moments the silence begins to itch. They reach for their phones, their words, their masks. And so the visitor flees, not because they were rejected, but because they were seen. Those who are spiritually awake are not lonely. They dwell in a fullness that the world can scarcely imagine. Their solitude is not emptiness, but abundance, an overflowing presence that requires no witness. They are like mountains, silent not because they have nothing to say, but because their language is the wind, the mist, the slow patience of stone. And when you approach such a being, if you are quiet enough, you begin to feel that same silence growing in you, not as absence, but as peace. That's the paradox. The ones who seem to withdraw from visitors are in truth the ones most open to the universe itself. They have traded conversation for communion, not the chatter of minds, but the resonance of being. You see, to live awake is to live without the constant need for interruption. The modern mind craves stimulation like an addict. Every silence must be filled, every pause bridged with noise. But when you awaken, you begin to notice that silence is not empty. It's alive, breathing, whiskering. It's the hum of the cosmos beneath the static of human thought. And that is why the spiritually awake person seems to vanish from society. They no longer chase the glitter of the carnival. They've seen the machinery behind the curtain, the flickering lights, the gears of desire that keep the whole play running, and they've stepped off the stage. The audience keeps clapping, waiting for them to return, but the performer is gone. They've walked into the wings, into the dark, where real life begins.
People often misunderstand this as isolation or nihilism, but the truth is that the awakened one is not hiding from life. They are hiding in it. They are hidden inside each breath, each movement of light through the trees. They have dissolved into the ordinary. So when you come knocking, looking for the wise one on the mountaintop, they may be sweeping the floor, watching a bird, or staring into a cup of tea. Visitors want an audience with the enlightened, but enlightenment is the disappearance of the audience. There is no one left to meet. What people call enlightenment is simply the exhaustion of pretending to be separate. When that illusion falls away, there is no person to visit. There is only consciousness, wide and unclaimed. To those who are still dreaming, this can feel like rejection, but to the awakened, it's just how things are. The dance of human interaction, gossip, debate, ambition, performance becomes like echoes in a cave you've already explored. You still hear them, but they no longer compel you to respond. It's like watching people argue about the reflections in a mirror when you can see the mirror itself. You love them, but you cannot join their debate without betraying what you've seen. So you stay silent.
And in that silence, something extraordinary happens. The world reveals its hidden architecture. You begin to hear the pulse of reality itself, the rhythm that underlies thought, the music that existed before language. The spiritually awake live in that music. To them, every sound is a note in the great symphony of being. And so the chatter of visitors often feels discordant, not because it's bad, but because it is out of tune with the deeper harmony. They aren't protecting themselves from people, they're protecting the song. Sometimes, when a visitor truly listens, not with the mind, but with the heart, the awake one will open. Words will come not as teaching, but as sharing, like rain falling naturally on open ground. But this can only happen in stillness. Most visitors arrive as storms. You have to understand, awakening is not an accomplishment. It's a surrender. It's the death of the busy self. And visitors, in their eagerness, often come to awaken the awake, as if there were still something to fix, some wisdom to extract. But the awake cannot be awakened. They are like open space. How can you improve space? How can you decorate silence? So they smile quietly and withdraw again into the mystery. There is an ancient rhythm to solitude. When you step into it, you begin to see that what we call loneliness is just the fear of meeting ourselves. Visitors are often terrified at that encounter, and so they seek company, noise, distraction. But the awake person has crossed that desert and discovered that on the other side of loneliness is communion, not with people, but with existence itself. When you have touched that communion, you realize that even the stars are visitors, burning briefly in the vast night of eternity. And suddenly, the drama of social existence feels small, almost comical. The spiritually awake see the world as a kind of play, a divine theater,
And while they love the actors, they no longer believe the script. They withdraw not in sadness, but in laughter, because they see that the universe is improvising endlessly, beautifully, without destination. Sometimes they try to share this, but most people don't want freedom. They want meaning. They want to be told what it all means, who they are, where they're going. But the awake one can only smile and say, "You are the meaning. You are the direction. You are the dream dreaming itself." And that's not the kind of answer most visitors want to hear. So the awake learn to speak in silence, to communicate in presence. Their company becomes medicine, but only for those ready to receive it. For everyone else, it feels like emptiness.
They want advice, guidance, instruction, but what they get is stillness, and in that stillness their own noise becomes unbearable. That's why visitors leave, not because the awake turn them away, but because the mirror they hold shows too much. It shows the masks, the compulsions, the false stories we cling to, and to see that is to feel the ground dissolve beneath you. But those who stay, those who can endure that dissolving, they find something else. They find that the silence of the awake is not a void, but a womb. Something is being born in that quiet, a new way of seeing, of being, of belonging. When the visitor stops knocking and simply sits beside the door, they discover that the door was never locked. They were never outside. They were only dreaming of separation. The spiritually awake don't like visitors because, in truth, there are no visitors. There is only consciousness visiting itself, forgetting and remembering over and over again. The dance of awakening is not a journey from ignorance to knowledge, but from fragmentation to wholeness. And when you are whole, you no longer crave interruption. You no longer need to be visited or to visit. You are home, everywhere, always. So, if you ever meet one of these silent beings, don't ask them for words. Don't try to break their solitude. Sit with them. Let their silence reach you. You may find that it begins to open something inside, a doorway, a window, a vastness you had forgotten was yours. Because the truth is, awakening doesn't make you special. It makes you simple. It brings you back to the naked immediacy of being, before thought, before language, before the need to explain yourself. And when you live there, when you truly rest in that timeless presence, every visitor becomes an echo of your former self, still searching for the key to a door that was never closed. So the spiritually awake smile and stay quiet, not out of indifference, but because they know the only way to teach awakening is to embody it, to be so still that others remember stillness, to be so at home in themselves that others recall where home truly is. And maybe, one day, when the visitor grows weary of knocking, they too will step back, turn inward, and realize there was no house, never a door, never a visitor at all. Only the dream of separation, dissolving into the eternal now.